Okay, so it's 6:30, so I think we're ready to get started. My name is Samantha Bonwick, and I'm the outreach coordinator at the Pincher Creek Library. And I'm very happy to welcome the Blackfoot Digital Library project here to the library tonight. We're really excited to have this presentation available to us. We are recording this presentation, so if anybody who's present here tonight does know of anybody else who would like to see this but might not have been able to attend tonight, you can let them know that in a few days it will be up on the Chinook Arch YouTube page for anyone to watch at their convenience. Before we begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement and then do a few housekeeping announcements, and then I'll turn it over to our presenters. I acknowledge that we gather as the Pincher Creek District Municipal Library on the traditional land of the Piikani people, both past and present. We honor the land itself and the people who have tended to it throughout the generations so that we may continue to work, learn, and play here in the present and into the future. So during the presentation, we would ask everybody to keep their mics muted throughout the presentation. If you do have a question during the presentation, there is a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. You can click on it and write down a comment or a question at any point, and then at the end of the presentation, I will be reading the questions off so that the presenters can answer them accordingly. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Kathy, for inviting us to speak today. Thank you, everyone that is attending here and folks that might be watching this later on down the road on the YouTube channel. I think we'll just start by introducing ourselves, and then we'll jump into the presentation, and we'll just be kind of passing it back and forth to speak to the various parts that we have to share with you today. So my name is Christine Clark, and I teach and research in the New Media Department at the University of Lethbridge. And I was born in traditional Blackfoot territory on the Bow River, just in the town of Cochrane, and have been in the Lethbridge area for the last 10 or so years. And I've been very honored to be involved in this project and to be able to speak to it today to all of you. I can pass it to Danielle Heavyhead next.
So I'm Danielle Heavyhead, and I run the Blackfoot Digital Library, and I'm from the Blood Tribe, Kainai, and I've grown up here. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, and so I'll leave it to Melissa.
Hello, I am Melissa Shouting. I do some of the research and writing for the website as well as the consultation process. I am also a student within the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Lethbridge, so I'm currently working on a master's.
Okay, I will launch our slides here. Find my mouse. There we go. Okay, So this project is using digital imaging technologies as well as new web technologies to virtually reconnect Blackfoot items that are in museum collections in Europe with people living in Blackfoot territory. So the name of the project is Mootookakio'ssin, which means distant awareness in English. And this name was given to the project by Dr. Leroy Littlebear, who is one of the elders guiding the project. There's many more people involved than Melissa, Danielle, and I. It's a large collaborative effort of people from different backgrounds and disciplines that are all contributing their different areas of expertise to make what we've done possible. We've been working together for the last 3 years, and we are led by elders from all 4 tribes in the Blackfoot Confederacy. And there's been lots of people that we've talked to along the way as well, and we thank all the individuals that have contributed. We're also working with Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists and students from the U of L and universities in the UK. And you'll see a little bit of their work later on in the presentation. So the project that we're going to be talking about today is building on the efforts to document Blackfoot stories and cultural material and make it available to the community. One of the key main huge contributors to this work has been the Blackfoot Digital Library, which is providing the home to our project, Mootookakio'ssin. So Danielle Heavyhead, the liaison for the BDL, is here to tell us a little bit about the Blackfoot Digital Library, its history, and her work with it.
So I started the Blackfoot Digital Library back in 1995, and it's a repository for all things Blackfoot. It's kind of like a living library in that it continues to grow and expand, as does this project, the Mootookakio'ssin project does as well. And it's been a lifelong project that I've been working on. And it's really about repatriating our heritage and fulfilling our obligations to past elders and present elders, so that we can record their information, record their stories, record their histories, and be able to pass that down to future generations. And for a way for us to be able to preserve that and learn from it as our generations move forward. And it will be a home for Blackfoot people to be able to share their own experiences and share their stories and their place within the land. Everything is situated within the land on the Blackfoot Digital Library. We made sure that everything is connected to the land. So if you can see on here, there's a map on the bottom right corner that you'll see that all of the assets that we have are contained on the map. And so they all have a place that they belong to within Blackfoot territory. And some of them are also outside of Blackfoot territory, like in England or Germany or other places like that, because they're being held in those places, not because they belong there. And so, yeah, that's just kind of the basics of the Blackfoot Digital Library, and I'll let Christine take it from there.
So Danielle mentioned items overseas, in England, abroad, and this is just one example of a knife sheath that's at the British Museum. And that's what the project that we're talking about today is particularly focused on, is material that was removed from Blackfoot territory and put into museums abroad. So maybe I can pass it on to Melissa to tell a little bit about the story of just like how did all these items get over there?
Okay, so when, like during the earlier times of colonization, everything ties back to the Indian Act and, you know, the implementation and I guess enforcing the Indian Act. So the Indian Act allowed provincial and federal governments to create reserve systems. And during that time, it was the same time when residential schools were starting to become established and created. Children were being placed within these institutions, but at the same time, the families and the parents of the children were being placed on reserves. So when individuals were placed on the reserve, they didn't have access to any kind of training to acquire jobs. They didn't have access to transportation. So just being able to leave the reserve was something that was, you know, you had to apply for a pass to do. And that was practiced. I think there's documentation of it going, you know, well into 1970s in our area. So if you think about individuals that weren't allowed to leave, but they also weren't allowed to hunt their food, they were kind of stuck between a wall and a heart, like, you know, a wall and a rock, I guess. And in doing so, like just living that life and not being able to move freely, they had to find other ways to feed themselves. So at the time, settler people that were coming through, or just ethnographers, other museum staff from other places in different parts of the world, especially the British Museum, they would offer a small amount of money for the items. So it wasn't, these things weren't sold because they wanted to, it was sold to settler people because it was a means of survival at that time. So through acquiring all of these items, they were eventually sent back to Europe, all the different museums. I think some were sent down to the States when they started just kind of documenting everything about Indigenous people. And some of them have been sitting in these museums for a long time. And like most recently, we just looked at a collection that hasn't been seen since it was taken. So the purpose of taking the items or buying the items wasn't because they wanted to, I guess, showcase. It was more of like preserving what might be gone. And when you think about it that way, they assumed that all Indigenous people would eventually become non-existent. So to still be alive and to still, you know, be working and thriving and forging our own way through society today, it's a huge thing to be able to go into these places and look at collections, knowing that intent, but also knowing what we're going to do with it today. So, yeah, just in a real quick 5 minutes. I think a lot of times, you know, when we think about museums, we don't necessarily think about the people behind the museums, the people that are funding the museums. So during the earlier times of colonization and establishing Canada as a whole, there were the museums or their benefactors would often fund these travel expeditions to acquire items that told a story about the people that they were encountering on their travels. And that's how these items came to exist. So came to exist in the museums today. So when we go in, we get to see like who acquired them and where they came from, and a little bit of notes that were attached to it. But we also have our own stories too. And that's kind of what the website does. Yeah, anything else?
Well, that's really important. And I think, yeah, just underscoring how much material is over there. And, you know, Danielle especially has been working for the last decade trying to identify collections in different museums, but the paper trail for it is really sparse. So it's really a matter of those museums having staff who have the expertise to even be able to identify it as being Blackfoot, have it labeled on their databases that way, so that people looking for what's out there can find it. And I think it's still a long work in progress. And certainly Danielle has made a lot of headway on that with all the material that she's already been able to identify. But yeah, we are going to show you about 25 items that we currently now have available to look at on the website that we've built. So I'll maybe shift into talking a little bit about what we've done to provide better access to some of the things that are over there. If I can figure out how to run my slides again. Sorry, they're jumping all over the place. So our goal with this, and in conversation with the elders that we gathered with really early on in this process, was to improve access to the material that is being held in collections. Initially, it's been in England, and since then we've expanded to looking at some museums in Scotland and Norway and Germany. And so our process has been to visit the museums. We traveled there in 2019 with a large group of elders to photograph material in 3 different museums. From those photographs, we're able to generate high resolution 3D models, which we'll show you in a minute. And then the purpose in doing that was to find a way to bring them home in a way that would not only make them available to look at, but also create spaces for conversations so that people can learn about the history of these items, how they got removed, and also a lot of the material knowledge that they represent. So we've been doing this through a microsite that we built for the Blackfoot Digital Library that shows the images of the items that we visited, as well as information about the materials, their stories, histories, designs. We also have students that are working with our project to make new contemporary art. So activating the historic items through contemporary practice and art making. And then finally, we've kind of been dabbling in community gatherings, as you can imagine. We've been a little bit limited in that capacity, but looking at, creating spaces where people can learn about the material, access the website, and also learn traditional practices like Blackfoot beading, as well as some of the digital skills that we've used to make the material on the website. So the idea here is that people are able to now visit the site, visit some of our community gatherings, and see and interact with these high resolution visuals of cultural material, as well as make new artworks, potentially, if they're so inspired to do so. I think it's important to also mention some of the protocols that we're following that we developed through conversation with the elders that we're working with to make sure that everything we're doing, we're trying to do it in a good way. So I think one of the most important things to mention is that all the data, all the images of the material and the websites that have been produced are part of the Blackfoot Digital Library. And that copyright is held by the Blackfoot people and it's administered by the BDL. We're also only displaying images of non-sacred items. So there's a vetting process that each item goes through to make sure that it's appropriate to share. And then also thinking about what information is appropriate to share about that piece. So there's some information that isn't for public dissemination, and some information that is more general knowledge. And as much as possible, we're pulling from Blackfoot writers and books and exhibits, and also sharing links to those sources to kind of help contribute to that network of information about Blackfoot material.
And it's important to always go back to that process, right? So when I'm going through information to be put onto the website, I'm going to sift through it, and then I'm going to create, I guess, put it in a way that is going to be presented onto the website. And I'm going to take that information and go back to the elders and say, okay, this is how it's going to be presented. Is this what really, and captures what the item is and the knowledge that's attached to it? And am I allowed to put this on the website? So going through that process with every single item, it is time consuming, but it's done right. It's done in a way that really reflects who we are as a people and how we can move forward. And I think when we start to think about we start to think in a collective mindset, we're able to really understand who we are in relation to one another. So going through that process with every single item has taught me a lot through this journey and working with the website. But it is time consuming, but it's worth it.
All right, so we're going to talk just a little bit now about the process that we followed to make what we've made. Really building up the anticipation for this website. But it started with a trip that took place over about 10 days in July 2019. I don't know, Danielle, do you want to speak to this part?
Okay, so we went to England, and in England we visited three museums there: the Archaeology and Anthropology Museum in Cambridge, the British Museum, and the Hornemann Museum and Gardens in London. And it was a whole group of elders that we brought with us. It wasn't just us. So we had Jerry Potts and Velma Potts and John and Carol Murray and Linny and Kent, a young man that came with us. And so we went through the collections of each of these and decided, what it is that can go up on the website. And these are collections that really hadn't been visited by Blackfoot people before, and hadn't been recorded by anybody to be able to be brought home and shared with everyone. So we really made a point of it to take pictures and take video and to take as much information as we could from those museums so that we could share on the Blackfoot Digital Library and on the Mootookakio'ssin website, so that would be available for everybody. And you can see here that this is the British Museum, and we're looking at some shirts and leggings there. And again, these are things that haven't been home. They haven't been seen by Blackfoot people in well over 100 years. And they were really important for us to be able to look at. And now I know there's going to be questions about repatriations, and that is not part of our goal. There is a group that handles repatriations within the Blackfoot Confederacy, and so they deal with that. And we are not focused on repatriations at all. We are focused on just recording and collecting as much information as we can for the websites. Now, there has been a repatriation that has happened because of this project from the Royal Albert Museum in Exeter, and they repatriated some, I think it was Crowfoot's clothing. They repatriated to Siksika, and so that has happened, which is a really nice result that we've been able to have out of this project. And we're really, excited to see that kind of thing happening. And we're hoping to have more exchanges like that happening in the future. And yeah, so this has been really a learning experience for all of us, and a growing experience for all of us as well. And this is the Hornemann Museum, and you can see there's a fetus bag that's a buffalo fetus bag that was stuffed with various herbs and stuff, and we can see Tom there is taking pictures, and he's starting the 3D process with the high resolution photographs, and he would take pictures from all sides and all angles of the bag, and then eventually he'll stitch that together, and he made it into a 3D object, which we were able to look at and manipulate on the website. If you want to go to the next slide. And I'll let Christine talk about the photogrammetry and RTI stuff.
Sure. So as Danielle was just saying, one of the photographic processes that we use to digitize a few of the items that we were looking at is called photogrammetry. And here's just another image of a moccasin being photographed, kind of a nifty turntable being manipulated with a program that Tom wrote as well. And with this particular setup, the turntable will rotate, and then an image is taken at every interval.
You're muted.
Was I muted that whole time? Oh no!
Just before you said the table will turn and a photo will be taken at every interval.
Okay.
And then after that.
Great, yeah. So here you can see the blue circles, blue rings that are going around the 3D model in the center. And so those represent each photo that was taken, and then the position of the ring is representing the angle in which the photos were taken. So this is a sort of screenshot of the software and the model that results. So what's great about this is because it's a photo-based 3D model, it's very dense in the mesh. And so you get a lot of surface detail. And then the texture that's applied to the mesh is also based on high resolution images. And so the resulting 3D model has a really high quality to it. Now we have had to optimize them a little bit more to make them not so, I guess, draggy on the website. You can imagine that kind of data being transferred while you're online would be pretty intense. So the versions that you see of these on the site are slightly downgraded just to be more performant, especially in areas that have slower internet speeds. So here's just a few examples of the 3D models that were created with this process. And then the other process we used is called reflectance transformation imaging. Now I will only refer to it as RTI, so I don't have to stumble on that word again. But essentially, what it does is the camera stays still, and then you change the light source for every photo that gets taken, and then all those photos get compiled to create an interactive image where you're essentially like moving the light source over the surface of the object, and that's going to reveal some more detailed surface information like stitching or hide marks. And so between these two technologies, you really get a lot of different views and ways of looking at each item. So the 3D model lets you rotate it and zoom in and look closely at all parts of the object. And then the RTI is focused in on one particular area of interest, and it lets you see it in quite great detail and resolution to reveal that surface information. And just a couple of examples of the RTI images, screenshots, but also available on the website. I see there are a few questions in the chat already. Do you think it's a good time to answer those, Samantha, or should we just keep on pushing through?
Sure, if you think it's a good idea to talk about, address some of the questions, you can go for it.
Okay, so I see Gordon Peterson has a question about the sacred items, and that is a really good question. There were sacred items that we did visit and we did photograph because some of the elders wanted to have copies of those. They, for example, John Murray had some items that he wanted to be digitized for his own personal collection that belonged to one of his ancestors, Little Plume. So in those cases, it's a private data set that was just shared with a single individual for them to reference, and wouldn't be shared publicly. But there certainly is still value in having those items documented, just done so in a way that's quite protective over who has access to that file. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, the BDL also records sacred items, but we don't put them up online. We always keep a copy of them so that we can have them for future reference and stuff. And so I try to take photographs or video or whatever of the sacred items, and then I always have them in the BDL archives, even though they're not online. Then I have them for people if they want to come and see them. Then they're always available.
And I think it's important to note when we say, or when individuals say sacred, they mean ceremonial items. So, those things are used for ceremony. And within the Blackfoot Confederacy, because we were one of the last nations to go through that colonial phase, a lot of our ceremonies and societies and practices to renewing that knowledge within our own people is still very much alive. So we're constantly engaging in renewal processes throughout the year. And we're one of the few nations that didn't, there wasn't a break in our ceremonies. So they were they were always being practiced, even though individuals were going to residential school, and just going through those institutions. A lot of that practice went underground and it was kept secret for a while, and then eventually it started to emerge within the community. So in dealing with those ceremonial items, a lot of the relationships that are being built between our group and the Blackfoot Confederacy with the museums allow that repatriation process to go a little bit quicker than it would have in the past. So the project kind of lends to that relationship building process between First Nations people and museums abroad. So there's very, like, our project is multifaceted, but yeah.
There was a question about the number of items in some of the collections. And so it definitely does vary. And it's hard to tell sometimes with some pieces because it might be labeled like planes. And so until you actually get to see the object, like, you might not be able to know whether or not it is Blackfoot. But the British Museum had like over 100 items. I know at the Hornemann, they only had a handful. There was like 15 items from one particular donor, who actually the son of the Hornemann who founded the museum was on one of these expeditions to Pagani to collect material for the museum. And then the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, I think they were more in the 30 to 50 range. But there's, thousands and thousands in other museums spread out across Europe and further. For Gordon's next question about the insights, maybe we'll take a look at the site and we can point out some of the things that we've discovered there. And then Kathy Scrimshaw has a question about being able to use virtual items for ceremonial purposes, or would it need to wait for repatriation?
When it comes to using items, we'd wait for repatriation, or they would be made by an artist that has the rights to make that item. And so it's not something that can be done virtually. It's something that has to be done in person.
All right, we will continue through. Thanks for those questions. This is great. This is the website, so you're welcome to browse it on your own at home as we go through it as well. The address, maybe I'll just put it into the chat here for everybody. And on the site, it was really important for us to try and make it feel like the objects were coming home in a sense. In the introduction to the Blackfoot Digital Library, there's a video with the late Narcissus Blood, and he states that new and changing technologies can work against the people or be harnessed and used in their own worldview. And so our attempt here is to harness the 3D models in the Blackfoot worldview. And we really aim to design an online space that used some of the basic building blocks of web technologies and then assemble them with Blackfoot ways of knowing to guide decision making. So to start with, we bring people into the collection through a story. And through these illustrations that were done for us by William Singer III. And so you can kind of go through this in your own time, but it just gives a little bit of the background of what we've done, why the items are important, and then starting to look at one particular item, the owl case. And we use this owl case to explain, how these items were taken from Blackfoot territory through this contact with ethnographers coming through the area. So connecting it to its use, its origins, the beadwork that's on it, and then explaining the contact that happened with this particular group. You might recognize some of the names here. We also take the time, really important to explain, the context in which the items were taken, just like we did with this group with you guys earlier in our presentation, talking about the need to exchange these items as a means of survival during cultural genocide and how the items were taken away. We also want the site to feel like a celebration of the cultural revitalization that's been happening and is ongoing. And so how these visits are important to reconnect with some of these pieces. So the owl case that you saw there belonged to Little Plume as well. And so that is the great-grandfather of John Murray, who's just seated on the right of this photo. And this was the first time he was able to visit these pieces from his grandfather. So we'll jump into the collection, and we can look at the War Club maybe. So here you can interact with the items that are on the website. They're presented in a large circle, and you can rotate through the circle to take a look at the different pieces and filter them by some of the materials or tribes that might be associated with it, or what collection it came from. So clicking on an item will take you to the 3D view of it. This is a little lower resolution, I think, with the video conferencing happening. But here you can see zooming in on the club and looking at the details around it. So what was interesting, I think, also about this club was that John Murray knew lots of stories about his grandfather. One of the sort of main stories he would tell was about these 3 Assiniboine men that Little Plume came across, and they had a battle that resulted in Little Plume killing 2 of them. And so you can see 3 men depicted on the top of the club here. And so we're speculating that likely that's a representation of that encounter. So we've tried to document that type of information in the stories about each piece. So going through the history, you can learn a little bit more about Little Plume. This is quite a famous photograph by the photographer Edward Curtis, who famously edited out the clock from this photo to try and depict, the inside of this teepee without something that wouldn't appear to be like, traditionally Blackfoot. So some editing, obviously, that was happening. Some videos. This video is from YouTube, but it includes Little Plume at the end in this sign language council. So trying to aggregate and include as much material to recontextualize each of these items as much as possible. And then I think also like pointing to areas where there is missing information. Certainly lots of the items aren't associated with an individual. And so there's lots of question marks about who they might have belonged to, but the lack of documentation when a lot of these things were acquired makes it quite challenging. So I think it'll be interesting now that the site's online to see, what people might recognize or through community conversations, finding out a little bit more. I guess I'll just jump to the Rti View as well. So you can see that on the site. So just another way, as you can see, of looking at, of course it's not working. Just refresh it real quick. another way of seeing that object. There we go. So now you can see how the light source can be dragged around to reveal those markings. And you can get like a better sense, I think, of the leather strapping and things like that too. Anything else you guys want to say about the site? And show on the website? You can direct me.
No, I think we've pretty much covered it.
It's 7:15 now. So just in terms of time.
Okay, we can power through. It's there for you to all keep exploring.
Yeah, and I encourage you to, go through it and take a look at each item, because with each item you're able to see how RTI and photogrammetry just kind of adds to viewing that on a site, on a microsite, and being able to showcase these items back home in a way that is easily accessible for individuals who are, identify as Blackfoot, or people who want to become allies to Blackfoot people, but also being a resource that individuals go to. You're now able to share this with students who might be doing, projects for school, or just that mom that comes in and wants to show her kids something. So yeah.
Maybe you can speak to the student artwork, Melissa, too.
Yeah, so we've been working with 2 classes, an art, what are the classes called again?
It's Indigenous Art Studio 1 and 2.
Okay, yeah, and then we have a group that kind of joins in from the UK, from London. So they learn about the website, but they also learn about techniques and history and all that stuff that's associated with art. And one of the projects that the students have to work on is creating something that responds to the website. So Serene here was able to, really take a look at the moccasins using the technology, and kind of just studying how they were made, studying the designs, the beadwork that was utilized. And then she applied that to this pair of Vans to kind of represent how she felt and how that contributes to who she is now. And then Martin Roundstone, he embarked on a journey of just learning how to do things using traditional techniques. So I think the beaded rope is around pieces, like long pieces of leather, whereas in contemporary work, we use rope now, like actual rope. And then I think a lot of his stuff, he uses sinew from animals. And then Cody Wells, the desk was in a residential school. So it's it's a desk from, I think, St. Paul's or St. Mary's residential school. And at first he didn't want to have it because of like the amount of trauma that is associated with residential schools. And I think it took him a while to come to the point where he started to apply his own artwork to it as a way of just kind of honoring that journey that our ancestors, like grandparents and parents, had to take so that we could exist today and, start our own lives. So yeah, they all kind of just looked at the website, learned about the project, and then presented art in their own way. So community gatherings. This was our last community gathering before COVID. So it's been a long time, and we just recently had another one. And it's interesting to go from community gatherings before COVID and then community gatherings after COVID. And just, you know, in that moment, you kind of, before you would always be so close to everybody, teaching them, or I would, teaching them how to bead. Whereas now it's like we're trying to do it while still keeping our distance. So it's been interesting. But the community gatherings were part of our, I guess, process to include community, because with the Blackfoot people, everything that we do is community oriented. So we did a lot of sharing about the project and the trip, and talking about the items that we did see, and sharing little bits and pieces of the conversations that we did have while looking at the items. And then also talking about how we plan on caring for that knowledge, because when we as Blackfoot people are transferred knowledge, or transferred, you know, the knowledge to make things, it doesn't mean that we own that knowledge, or that, you know, we're the only carrier that can carry that knowledge. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also a gift, because you get to build an alliance with the people that are transferring that knowledge to you, and to think about the future in a way that you become part of that process to sustain who we are as Blackfoot people. And that is something that, you know, I take pride in, because I get to share things with other people, and I get to include them in my journey, in my process of sharing and carrying knowledge. So the workshops and the community gatherings is something that I really enjoy. And it's probably besides creating the website, it's probably one of my favorite parts of the project. So the community gatherings created a point of access to the content on the website, while also creating space to share skills in Blackfoot beading and imaging technologies. And I think the last photo that we just saw, a group of students from the art studio class had come down, and they wanted to talk about art techniques. And as a female, I don't really know like a whole lot about male roles. So it just happened to be, you know, when students ask questions and I don't know, I'm going to send them to people that I think could help them better than I can. So I usually direct them to Danielle, or if there's somebody in the area, I can direct them to that person too. So one of the students, they asked about shirts, and I don't know a whole lot about shirts. And, you know, I kind of walked around the room, saw who was all there, and some of the older people from our community had come to this specific gathering with a group. So to be able to connect the students to those individuals it's not the usual way of doing things within academia. You usually go to a professor, whereas for us, we're looking for community members that will know the knowledge associated with that item, or are able to guide those students. So we direct them to non-faculty members. So I got really lucky, because I didn't know how to respond to the questions. So I just kind of directed them to another individual that had decided to attend the gathering that day. So through art making and the exhibitions and the workshops, we hope to enable artists and individuals within the community to learn about the items and to see the materials and learn the techniques and skills that connect to the knowledge and just creating those items within community. But at the same time, we're able to engage in that knowledge transfer, that renewal process of how we came to understand the practices and the techniques and how we were taught to do things by, you know, our grandmothers or our ceremonial parents. And then at the same time, by talking about the materials used, we connect that knowledge to the land, because a lot of the materials that we do use, we harvest it from the area. So we're very lucky as Blackfoot people to be living within our traditional territory, because our knowledge comes from our language and the land that our ancestors lived on. So we still have access to that. And I always tell people, like, I'm super privileged to have that connection to our elders and to our land and to the language, but also to the people within my community. Yeah.
So this kind of gets into the what's next. And I see there's a few questions about future possibilities in the chat here too. So one of the things that we ended up doing to go to more museums in the time of the pandemic was these virtual visits. So it was an alternative to travel, basically. It was still real time. So we had like large groups kind of assembled on either side and access to the museum stores. And then we had a high resolution camera that would go over the objects, and then the folks on our end could direct the camera, say like, zoom into this part, you know, can you explain to me like what that feels like, things like that. So certainly not like optimal, not the same as being there physically, but certainly a good alternative when travel isn't an option. And this is something we're considering of exploring further with some groups where, you know, taking everybody to the museum in Europe wouldn't be feasible. So like a classroom of students or potentially groups that have a particular interest in a style or you know, type of garment or things like that. So yeah, something that we're looking at refining and doing more of, as well as visiting more museums in person. So we've got more research to do. We have additional 3D models of items that were scanned during the virtual visits. So that was at the National Museum Scotland, and then more recently at the Hastings Museum in England. And so those items still need to be researched further to try and yeah, piece that puzzle back together where documentation isn't always the best. Certainly working with schools, you know, one of the great parts of being at the university is having that connection to the ed program, as well as Melissa has some connections to the U of C's Masters of Education program. And so looking at potentially developing some material that could go alongside the website for teachers to use, and things like hands-on making, I think, would be important in that. More workshops and public programming. So finally being able to get out in person. We've applied for more funding to do more of this come fall. And I think the art making opportunities that the students have been exploring are also really important. We're in the process of developing a website that will exhibit that work. And I think there was a question in the chat too about doing an actual exhibition, and certainly that is also something on our radar, either doing an exhibition at the U of L Art Gallery here and or at the Letheby Gallery in London, England, which is at Central St. Martin's. So that's right downtown in King's Cross Station, having student work exhibited in that gallery space as a way of kind of connecting with our UK partners. 7:30, we did it. And yeah, I think lots of time for more questions now too. There's some information to connect with us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. So we've got lots of posts going out there as well.
Thank you for being here tonight. It's been really informative and meaningful what you guys are doing. I can tell it's very meaningful to you, and I think it's very meaningful to everybody, especially around like Southern Alberta. So thank you for being here. There are a few more questions, so I will just maybe read them out and then you guys can answer them. I think you answered this one. Is there going to be any efforts to present this site to public school students in the future?
So we have already been presenting to public schools. I've been out to Cardston Elementary to talk about the website and to show the students the website. And I've also been out to Tabor. I've been to a couple schools within the city of Lethbridge as well. So those schools have reached out on their own to ask if we can go to present the website or to talk about the project. And I think that's, that's great for the schools to do that on their own, but they only knew about the project because I know people that work within the school districts. But I think as we start to talk more about it and kind of get back out into the community now that restrictions have been lifted and we feel safe doing so, we're always more than happy to go and do a presentation at a school. But we're also working with other students and looking at how we can build curriculum to go, to be delivered alongside the website. So the website itself isn't done. We're going to be continue growing this project and to be, we have plans to expand it, but we have to do things slowly because we want things to represent who we are as a confederacy. So a lot of us do come from Kainai, but it's not, the website is designed to showcase the Blackfoot people as a confederacy, which includes Skapi Bigani and Bigani, and then Gana and Siksika. I think when Southern Alberta thinks about Blackfoot people, they tend to kind of just think about us in relation to where the reserves are situated, rather than a group of people that understand and share the same history and have lived amongst each other for, since time immemorial. It's something that we as people are starting to talk more about and starting to, help Southern Albertans understand and learn about all the four nations rather than just one at a time.
Yes, it's so meaningful and so overwhelming almost that I don't really, you're so eloquent at answering. I don't know how to respond, but thank you for answering in such a way that's, yeah,
Yeah, nobody ever responds.
It's very passionate. So thank you for that. That is a really, really in-depth answer. I love that. The next one, what were some of the most significant or surprising items that were rediscovered? She says that's not quite the word she wants to use, but she hopes you understand what she's getting at when she asks.
One that comes to mind is a dress that we currently have on the site. And I'm just going to go to it so I don't get the information incorrect. But it wasn't even photographed on the British Museum. So there wasn't any like good documentation about it, except for on one tag, it identified it. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to scroll over to the dress now. Seeing the shortcomings of our navigation here. So there was a tag that we found on the dress when we pulled it out to look at it at the museum that identified it as belonging to Old Son's daughter. And so this created a little bit of a conundrum for us just because the dress was also labeled as being purchased in Pincher Creek. So this Old Son was a prominent Siksika chief. So, you know, the dress being in Pincher Creek didn't necessarily make geographic sense. And it was purchased in 1906. So one of our colleagues in the UK has been trying to do some fact finding around this dress. I can actually share it in the chat here. And so she's actually reached out to like the descendants of the people who owned the store that it was bought from, as well as descendants of the person who bought the dress to try and like find out where that information about it being Old Son's daughter's dress came from. We haven't made too much headway on those contacts, but it's something that, you know, following those threads I think is really enjoyable and rewarding, and a work in progress.
I was just going to say it's probably a lot of work, but it would be very rewarding after all that to get an answer. That's awesome.
I think like in relation to the question that was just asked, I think it's a lot of times when working on a project like this, you think about the items themselves and, you know, rediscovering or learning new things about the items themselves. But for me, it wasn't necessarily the items or the knowledge associated with those items, because I come from a family that has always been crafters and artisans. So I know the knowledge that is associated with a lot of the items. But for me, it was rediscovering kinship alliances within my own family and learning about those alliances and how each person related to, you know, relates to one another, whether it's through ceremony or through extended family. So there's some amulets that are on the website. They used to hold baby, like the umbilical cords, and they would put them in there. So we were talking about that, and we kind of like each of us had little bits and pieces of information associated with those items, and we kind of pieced all the information back together. But then through that process, we were able to realize, like, one of the elders started sharing information. They're like, oh, well, who told you? So I told them my grandma, and I told them who my grandma was, and just my journey with my grandmother and who her ancestors were. And the elder had just said, I had no idea you were her granddaughter. That's who we would go to when we needed stuff for ceremony. So to see that relationship between the elders and my grandparents was something that had, you know, completely opened doors, because we're each connected, not just through our bloodline, but through our ceremony lines. And, you know, those through ceremony, those people are just as much our family as my mom and dad. So to be able to sit there with them and kind of, you know, just soak in that feeling of them being able to see my grandma's granddaughter, and at the same time remembering me when I was so young, is something that's like a different feeling than looking at the items themselves. So being able to make those connections within community is something that was more significant to me within the project.
It's gotta be insanely meaningful. I can't even imagine. That would be wonderful. Thanks for sharing. That's awesome. Let's see. Gordon asks, are these techniques being used for other people's and other museum collections? Do you know?
I do know that the Smithsonian has a large library of 3D material, and they've actually created like their own platform to host that as well. And yeah, other museums are definitely starting to use photogrammetry more to digitize things. A lot of them are using platforms like Sketchfab to host those 3D files. The Royal Alberta Museum just did photogrammetry on a dress that's hosted on Sketchfab, and it is stunning. They did a really incredible job. So yeah, certainly there's like efforts being made in lots of places to begin this kind of digitization process. But it's very time intensive. Not necessarily to do the photogrammetry in the first place, but the post-processing can take quite a bit of expertise in 3D modeling and you know, patching up some of the areas that the software hasn't quite been able to make sense of the structure, especially where there's like hair or tassels, or you can see on some of the models, even on our site, there's like a little bit of clumping that happens. So for some of the pieces, Tom, who we're working with, has gone back in and remodeled based on photos to try and get a more accurate representation. And that's like hours and hours and hours of work on one piece. And he says that you could just like spend a year on one item just trying to make it perfect, you know, as like accurate as possible. So yeah, there's definitely some challenges with certain types of material in museums, depending on if it's like a hard or a soft object. But yeah, some really interesting efforts out there to begin this.
Wow, this for sure looks like it's been an extensive project, and it has so many little arms and so many people. It seems to have taken so many people to bring it all together. It's really amazing. And I'm really thankful that you guys shared it with us tonight and shared all the information in the chat. I've taken a picture of it so that if anybody participating here does want some more information, you can always contact the project. I'm assuming that slide you showed us at the end with all your contact information, as well as you're welcome to email me. And like I said, I've taken pictures of all the links Christina has shared in the chat. So I'm happy to share that as well. We're kind of running close on time, so I will say thank you very much for being here with us tonight. It was very informative and made me really want to spend more time on the website itself and do my own exploration. And yes, thank you to everybody who took the time out of their night to come and watch and participate. And just thanks for being here.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Kathy, for hosting us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Thanks.
No problem. I guess I never know how to properly say goodbye on Zoom. It's kind of an awkward thing to do, but I guess we'll say goodbye. And again, thank you. And if anyone has any more questions, please reach out to the project or myself here at the library. And I encourage you to go look at the site. It's amazing. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.